How's everyone doing tonight?
Hi.
Yeah, it's great to be here in the Computer Museum. I was, in the late 80s, I worked for Gordon Bell, which was great. And I was like my early 30s, and so this used to be a shack or a shed over on Moffett Field, and Gordon would drag me over to help him haul stuff around. So, so it was fun to see it, how it's blossomed and grown.
It's amazing. It's amazing to have this sort of new industry, but that also has this kind of rich history, and people have been collecting this history for a while. And I mean, and you're a part of that history. I'm not saying you're history.
No, I am, but I'm also honored to have lots of products here in the museum.
Oh yeah,
also,
yeah.
so.
I mean, we'll get to all the products, but let's start with your time at Cornell. Like, give us the basics. When were you there, and what did you study?
So I went to Cornell in 1974 and studied electrical engineering, and then I did my MEng in EE with some help from computer science, and I left in 79.
Okay, and tell me sort of the formative time at Cornell, or things you remember. You were telling me earlier about computer land, so
yeah. So I mean, I was an engineer since I was 2, right? I mean, it's at 2 years old, I took everything apart. Nothing in the house worked until I was about 6, when I figured out how to put it all back together, right? But there was no computers. This was all Heathkits and stuff like that. So I got to Cornell my first year in first semester, and you took CS101, and it was love at first sight. Right, and it was just great, and so.
And you knew then you wanted to be in this.
Yeah, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
Right? All this physics stuff, right? So, it was the computer classes were great. The computer architecture classes was great, and interestingly, one of my favorite classes was a city planning class. We had a requirement in those days to take liberal arts stuff. Right, and not just so we wouldn't just take all engineering classes, and so there was a city planning course that used, I think it was an EPA simulation, and basically modeled a city, and we all played developers or city council or whatever, and then every week we'd put our inputs in and they'd run it, and so that was like really a lot of fun, and it was an interesting example of what a computer simulation was capable of. It was definitely batch, because it would take days to run this thing. But the woman who ran it was a woman named Pat Vaughn, and her husband Hank was, I think, one of the senior IT guys. And they had just opened a computer store called Computerland of Ithaca. Right? And I mean, you never heard of a Computerland now, but in those days it was where you went to buy a personal computer. It was like the Apple Store, and they had MSI 8080s and Chromemcos and Apple IIs, and so I actually went to work there, and it was just great because I got really hands-on with lots of different computers, and it gave me a tremendous amount of experience, practical experience, early on.
I mean, you were there. That was the start of the personal computer industry. Around that time, did you, when you finished Cornell, or maybe before you finished Cornell, is that the place you wanted to go to?
Absolutely. So when I graduated, I had to actually go find a job.
Yeah.
Right? So I couldn't just hang around. Well, I guess I could have hung around the school, but I wanted to go get a job, and I wanted to go build computers someplace. And so I interviewed probably about a dozen places, and I decided to join Hewlett-Packard because they were doing really interesting work in personal workstations. So these were, I mean, the PC really didn't exist yet. It was they were hobbyist computers. And this was a real computer. Right? And
so you came out here?
No, actually, I was in Fort Collins, Colorado, which was, I grew up on Lower West Side of Manhattan, right? So I moved to Fort Collins. It's like 40,000 people, and it was really different. But I was very lucky there in that. We were working on lots of new products. Our most successful products in those days would probably sell, 25,000 units a year, right? And that was a lot. And years later, I would go visit labs where people were still using some of the products I'd worked on for instrument control, because that stuff didn't evolve as quickly. But so I spent about 7 years at HP. Got a chance. Some people spent 7 years at HP and never released any products. I was really lucky, and I got to release 3 or 4 generations of products there, and it was just a great experience.
You've been associated with some of the biggest names in the industry, in the tech industry, and we can talk about you're on the board of Amazon now. Your time at Apple and your time at Palm.
Don't forget Next.
And Next, yes, Next, which led to Apple.
16 years working for Steve on and off. That was the
dog
years.
Let's talk about that. So how did you get to Apple? I imagine it involved Next. So
yeah.
So how?
So I was in Colorado working for HP, and I decided I wanted to do a startup. And we assembled a group of people from both HP Fort Collins and from Motorola and a couple other places, and we started basically a company doing workstations, and we were going to develop a new processor and a new product, and we kind of assembled the first dozen people, and we got funding, and we took a vote, and everyone wanted to stay in Colorado, and I wanted to go to California. So,
good choice.
So I quit, and I joined this crazy company called Ardent, which was building graphic supercomputers. Yeah. Right? And so the idea was, sort of, a quarter of a Cray performance with graphics at a small refrigerator size and at a reasonable price, like $100,000 or something like that. And it was an amazing place. It had some incredible people. It was basically a spinoff from Convergent Technologies, and Gordon was there, and we had just a very outstanding engineering team, and we were a complete failure. Right? But we built some really cool products. I mean, we really did, and we were kind of the first to do high-density CMOS ASICs. We were the first to do Verilog and using Synopsys to generate the circuits, and I mean we had a lot of firsts. And we built a great machine, and we had a competitor in Boston who was building sort of an equivalent thing. They were a spin out of the workstation company there. I forget the name, but basically we just killed each other. And SGI walked in and just wiped us both out. Right? And we actually ended up merging. Which was,
Wait, the two companies merged?
The two companies merged, yeah, because you had sort of an East Coast and West Coast version. You put them all together, and it was worse. But SGI had account control. I mean, they hadn't started doing computers. They were doing terminals, but they had access to all the places where we would have had customers. So that was a very important lesson for an engineer who kind of came from the philosophy of build it and they will come. It doesn't really work that way, and you really need account control and customer access and
were you thinking about the world at that time as an engineer? I mean, were you thinking about it, and what was your sort of like business lens on the tech world at that point, or were you mostly just?
I didn't have one when I first came. Well, no, that's not true. I did because I'd spent a bunch of time at HP with customers, and I always liked doing that. But I ended up working with this guy Steve Blank. At Ardent, and Steve was our marketing guy. He's written a couple of books, The Steps to the Epiphany and the Startup User's Manual, and he does a lot of entrepreneurship classes and stuff. And we became really close friends, and I got a sort of 4-year marketing education, which was fabulous. I mean, it was both things to do and things not to do, right? Because they did some things that I wouldn't necessarily do now. But it was very educational, and it was a great group of people, and we built really great products. And then one day, sort of things were kind of not going very well, and my phone rings. I pick it up, and it's it's Steve Jobs, and John, this is Steve. I hear you're the best engineer in the Valley, and I'm thinking, oh my God. But it was actually Steve calling, and so he asked me to come up and join Next on the sort of middle third of Next. Next sort of had 3 phases.
And this was kind of so he had already started Next, and
that was the first third. Yeah. Okay. They started Next. They did the Cube. That wasn't exactly a success, and the product wasn't great, but the software was great. Right? I mean, it's just late. There's a sort of a pattern there, right? So I came in to kind of do the middle third, and we built next generation products, and the software actually started working really well, and it was great products, but they were way too expensive.
And what were you doing there?
I ran product development.
Okay.
I ran hardware engineering, and so the decision was made to basically split the company so that the software team could go on and build, next step for the PC, so that they didn't have to have the burden of building their own hardware. And Canon, who was one of the major funders of Next, wanted to be in the computer business. And I said, you guys sure you really want to be in the computer business? Absolutely, we want to be in the computer business. I'm, all right, off we go. And so what we did was we kind of built custom workstations or PCs running Windows NT, so standard operating system, and Next went off and did PCs with running NextStep. And so a couple of years goes by, we sell to Motorola Computer Group, and then Next gets acquired by Apple. Right? And so I'd heard through the grapevine that Apple was about to buy B. I gave Steve a call and said, I don't know what you guys are doing, but you should make sure you get in there and talk to the Apple, because it would make a lot more sense to buy Next.
Yeah.
And then a couple months later.
And it was a close decision, right? I mean, it was they almost did go with B.
Yeah, I think I wasn't in the room at the time, but everything I heard was Jean Louis Gasset got greedy, and but I wasn't there, and so the deal fell apart. And Next OS was much more mature, much more sophisticated, and was going to be a great platform for what eventually turned into Mac OS X.
Yeah.
So they basically acquired the company. I was kind of goofing around at the time, and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I got a call from Steve saying, hey, they're restructuring Apple. They need someone to run product development. Why don't you go to Apple? And so I did.
Yeah.
It was a little more complicated than that.
Did you do anything interesting there?
It was very interesting. So I got there, and McKinsey had actually been in there for probably six to 9 months working on restructuring the company. Right? And
so this was what year? 98?
96.
Oh, no, okay.
Yeah, I got there in February of 97. Okay. And so McKinsey was doing a lot of restructuring and helping them kind of figure out the long-term path. And could drag on. We got 16 minutes, so this could take a lot longer than that. But
yeah, you don't want to get to McKinsey.
The end result was we restructured the company from a divisional structure to a functional structure. Gil, who was a very nice man but was having trouble running Apple, got pushed out. The heroes of the story was Ed Woolard, who was chairman of the board, and Fred Anderson, who was the CFO. Really kind of made that all happen. We started interviewing for a new CEO for the company. Steve was an advisor, so he was helping find us a new CEO. Of course, there was no way we were going to ever find anyone who would meet his standards. So he kind of took it as interim. Actually, Fred was interim for a couple months, but then Steve came back as interim, and then eventually took over as CEO.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the iPod. But when we talked the other day, you told me an interesting story about the airport base station. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, let's talk about the iPod, but just sort of go into this little.
One of the things that made the iPod really successful was the fact that we made it cross-platform.
Yeah.
That we took it not only on and originally we did the iPod because we wanted to sell more Macs, right? I mean, there wasn't this vision of we're going to turn Apple into a consumer company. We're going to do all these consumer products and that's going to be the future of the company. It was like we're selling computers. We need to sell more, right? And so what do we need to do to sell more computers? Right? And so we decided to make the iMac the center of your digital universe, and we started developing lots of software. A guy named Sina Tamadin, who stays in hiding, but is responsible for all those wonderful apps that you know and love today. Sina did a lot of that work. We got it. We got to the iPod thing. But if you go back a little bit, we were looking at how to do networking for schools at home. Right? And schools had a lot of asbestos. Homes, people really don't like tearing out their walls and stuff. So we looked at a variety of different modes of networking, power line, phone line, and clearly wireless was the right way to go. And Intel at the time was in their advanced technology group was doing home RF, but we picked Wi-Fi because we thought it was a much better technology. And so I wandered up to Netherlands, and there was a small part of Lucent up there that had inherited this Wi-Fi for industrial control, and we consumerized it.
Yeah,
right? And
I mean, that's why I wanted you to tell the story. I feel like it's something that's happened again and again in your careers. These sort of, especially at Apple, these technologies that were kind of on the precipice that hadn't been consumerized. Yeah. You brought them together into products.
Yeah. And it was magical. I mean, if you go back and watch the launch at the Javits Center where we launched the toilet seat iBook. And Phil Schiller jumps off the scaffolding, with accelerometers in the iBook, and it was, presented wirelessly. This is really geeky, but it was an unbelievable launch. And then everyone pulls out these notebooks and they start surfing the web wirelessly. I mean, it was magical. And it was probably about 3 years before the PC industry finally came around, that Wi-Fi was the right way to go. So one of the things that happened was there was no reason at that point in time why Airport couldn't work with the PC2. So I went to Steve and I said, hey, I need some people, I need a little bit of money so I can do a configuration app for the PC to control the Airport base so you can set it up. And he went, no, we're not doing that. I'm like, okay, all right, and so fast forward a few years when we had the same conversation about the iPod, Phil Schiller and I, Phil was running marketing at the time, sort of dug our heels in real hard, and he went, okay, you guys do whatever you want to do, you're responsible. That isn't exactly how we put it, but we'll leave it that way on the video. And so we went and did it, right? And it did.
This is iPod for Windows.
This was iPod for Windows, and it was not iTunes. We had to go find a third-party software company and use that until he was convinced that it was a great idea that he had to move it to the PC, and that's when he told the guys to go do iTunes on Windows.
Yeah. I mean, and that was the thing that took the iPod to.
That and the fact that we did the smaller form factor, the Mini, was really took off and made a tremendous impact.
Right. Yeah. So you left Apple right before the iPhone, and then you found yourself in the position of competing with the iPhone.
Right.
Tell us about that.
So I sort of assembled the original team for the iPhone. I mean, it was basically the iPod division did that, and we actually started with the iPad first, and acquired a lot of technology that eventually went into the iPad as well as the iPhone. But the iPad was too big to make it work at that point in time. And so the sort of all the emphasis switched and went on to the iPhone, and so sort of it was, I helped assemble the team, pick some of the original technology, and then I decided it was time to move on, and I was going to take a year or two off, and I went to Mexico, built a house, and I was sort of hanging around thinking great thoughts, and then I get a call from Fred Anderson, and I owe Fred a huge debt through all of this, and he was a great CFO at Apple. He saved the company, and so he was with Roger McNamee, and Roger's a little bit crazy, but a really smart guy, and you'll see him on CNBC all the time. And he just wrote Zucked, which is getting pretty good reviews. And in any case, the two of them call me and go, let's go have a good time and restructure Palm. And I'm like, whoa. So they did a recapitalization on Palm. I came in as executive chairman with the goal of building a next generation operating system and next generation products. Within a year and a half or so, I ended up being CEO too. That was not part of the deal, but it sort of happened. And so we built WebOS, and we built Palm Pre and Pixie and a bunch of cool products. We were probably 6 to 9 months too late to really save the company, unfortunately. And
I remember when WebOS, when Palm Pre came out, I mean, people thought it was great. It got great reviews. You were just too late after the iPhone.
Yeah. And
Android
it's still great, by the way, because if you use an iPhone 10, it looks just like WebOS.
Yeah.
Kind of funny thing about that. So I mean, it was great technology, and we just never really had a chance to finish it. And we didn't have the scale. I mean, we were competing with Apple and Google, and RIM at the time, and they were actually a a force in those days. And so it was very difficult for a startup. Basically, we were a startup because we had very few revenues left. Sort of the original Palm business had kind of died off. And so we just ran out of runway. We just didn't have time. We had plenty of money. And so, we decided it was best if at that point in time we put the company up for sale. And, we had 5 suitors. And personally, I thought RIM should have bought it. I think it would have changed their whole future. But they couldn't kind of get through some things. And so it ended up being HP. And I was very excited about it because I thought Mark Hurd was great. And I was very excited about working for Mark because I could learn a lot from him. About a month after we closed the deal, he got fired. All right, so I was there 19 months. We kind of gave it our best shot. We evolved WebOS into tablets.
It's in TVs now, right?
Yeah, it's in LG TVs, and I mean it's in a variety of places. But HP just kind of ran out of momentum, and with all the CEOs and the autonomy deal and everything else. So I kind of wandered off.
Yeah, and then what have you been doing since? You had a time on in finance. You had.
Well, I went back to Mexico for a while.
Okay.
I built this house. It took me 5 years. And I never lived in it. Right. So I went down there and lived for a bit, and then I got a call from Bridgewater, which was the largest hedge fund in the world and a really unique place. And
radical transparency.
Radical transparency, and they needed sort of a co-CEO who could help them with technology. So we packed up packed everything up and moved to Westport, Connecticut. I learned a lot. Right? I learned.
You say that like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I mean, the guy who kind of wrote me into this was Craig Mundy, right? And Craig was CTO Microsoft. I mean, prior, he's a retired CTO Microsoft. So I thought, geez, if Craig's around, it must be a good idea. But I didn't really. I was not a cultural fit, shall we say? Right? I was much more of a Silicon Valley kind of guy, but I still think the whole thing about the fundamental premise of that Wall Street is changing, right? And the technology is becoming more and more important, and that there's a fundamental shift going. I mean, look, Goldman Sachs just went casual. Right? I mean, it shows the impact, that the techies are having on the place, right? Because the finance guys wouldn't do that.
You've had this opportunity. I mean, with Steve, with Ray Dalio, with Jeff Bezos, working with billionaires and sort of eccentric billionaires, I would say. What have you learned?
Yeah, I specialize in crazy billionaires. They're all really, really, really smart. It's no accident. They're not accidental billionaires, right? They're tremendously focused, right? To where the only thing that really matters is the mission, each one has very different strengths. It's really
right. They're so different.
Very different.
Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs, totally
different.
Right.
Completely different individuals, Jeff is a certifiable big thinker. Right? I mean, he's thinking out 5 years, right? And if he has to deal with something that's wrong, like today, he's not happy, right? And Steve was into the day-to-day details and wasn't thinking out 5 years. What he was he was very good at choosing a path. So when you got to a fork in the road, he instinctively knew which fork to take. He wasn't always right.
Even if he did it grudgingly, like the Windows.
Even if he did it grudgingly, right? But ultimately he would choose the right path, but he was very, he was very serial in his approach to things. So he would focus on one thing at a time, and once in his mind that was done, we might not have been done, but he was done. He moved on to the next thing. Jeff thinks big picture and lots of different things. Ray thinks about the economy in ways that I don't even have a clue as to what he's thinking about, right? I mean, it's just so far beyond any skills or capabilities I have. What was cool for me was I got to be an AWS customer, right? And so it really helped me.
Wait, no, you're at
at Bridgewater.
Bridgewater.
I'm advising another hedge fund in New York now, pure quant fund, massive compute, really interesting problems. And
they do it all on Amazon? They do it?
Well, we're doing a migration right now, but they got their own grid computer. They went on to, I guess, Livermore's website and, how to build your own supercomputer. Right? You got a manual there, right? And so, you get a bunch of open source software, you get some InfiniBand, you get some computers, and you put it all together, and you got this grid computing, right? So, but that doesn't make sense anymore, and it makes a lot more sense to be up in AWS. So it's great for me because I get a perspective of a high performance computing customer, on AWS, and so that's really a lot of fun.
What excites you in tech now? What are you into? What are you interested in? What are certain things that I don't know, either you're spending your time or money on?
Yeah, I rarely actually buy stuff. I expect people to give it to me.
Okay.
I get to test it, Yeah. I'm a really good tester, so if anyone's got any cool products they want tested, but seriously, I think the home is finally going to happen. Right? I mean, we've been talking about home automation for 20-something years, and the pieces were never there. But I think it's starting to come together, and I think the operating system on this is actually going to be voice control, right? And so I think it's not going to be next year, right? Because the stuff's just way too complicated. But it's starting to get reasonable, right? And so I think that's really big and really interesting. Obviously, there's just a lot of autonomous stuff.
Yeah.
Whether it's drones or cars or this or that. Again, this is enabled by the level of compute that we're starting to be able to deliver, in a low power, envelope. So, that combined with the cloud, with some edge computing and stuff is finally enabling us to do a variety of these kind of things. So I'm real excited about that. Obviously we're talking earlier about machine learning and AI and stuff, and that's just going to be table stakes, right? I mean, everything's going to rely on that, and which means that no one's going to know how anything works, right? So I mean, no one knows how it works. It's a mystery.
One thing I wonder about is, when you were at Apple, the big company in the industry was Microsoft. Microsoft is still, I think it's the most valuable company in the world still, but it sort of has a very different market and different place in the tech industry than it did then. Now the industry is sort of dominated by Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Google. And what do you think of that structure? Do you think it's less or more competitive? What do you think about just sort of those big companies and kind of the dynamic overall in the industry?
Yeah, I don't worry about that much.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the fact that I'm an Amazon board member, I think Amazon being in a good shape is a great thing. But the reality is, you go downstairs, right, and look around, right? There were companies that were, they were incredibly powerful and controlled, whole industries, and they're gone. Right? I mean, DEC and Cray and even IBM, it's not what it used to be, right? So these things all go in cycles. And there's going to be some other company that 20 years from now, Jeff was talking about this a month or so ago about where he said, we expect, at some point in time, Amazon will die, right? And so hopefully later rather than sooner, but I worry less about that because somewhere someone is working on innovations that no one else is thinking about, and it'll take the world by storm. So I'm less worried that everything gets controlled because I don't see it that way.
You just think there's a lot of innovation and
there's a huge amount of innovation, and I think it's accelerating dramatically. I mean, I think the work that the universities are doing is phenomenal. Even the high schools. I went back to visit my high school. I don't do that very often. But I went and visited a couple years ago. They invited me to come and meet with a bunch of students and stuff. And the high school kids were like, freshmen in high school were doing like this incredible robotics stuff. It's remarkable. So, I didn't get to see a computer until, I was 18 years old, 17 years old. So they're getting a 10, 15-year jump on what I had, right? And so I think that there's lots of opportunity for innovation and that it's accelerating, and there's certainly a lot of money sloshing around. I mean, I work with some entrepreneurs that, basically graduate from Stanford with $30 million in the bank to fund their company. It's crazy, but it's at least that's the way it was a year or two ago. Probably a little less so now. But so there's money and there's innovation and I think we let people do what they're good at.
All right. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.